Hey everybody, welcome to the Geordie and Josh show. We're back. It's been a few months since we were able to do this, but these are always the best, most entertaining, fun shows. And it's my pleasure to be here with Geordie Armstrong, Santa Barbara City College teacher, professor extraordinaire, all around environmentalist, and super smart, intelligent person. So, how are you doing, Geordie?
Oh, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Yeah. Got my
Yeah.
hair, got my hair going here and my background and my
Yeah.
coffee. So
Put
I'm
your hair
ready.
on this morning?
I'm ready to present well. What?
You put your hair on this morning?
Yeah. I put some water in it and a little mousse, and I'm in my I think I look good enough for YouTube mode. So here we are. But yeah, we've taken a few months off just because we're both really busy, and trying to find time to do things can sometimes be difficult. So here we are, and we got a lot to talk about. I wanted to dive right in and ask you about. We're going to do kind of a pop culture, current events, news podcast here today. I wanted to talk to you about Barbie and
Yeah.
the phenomenon that is Barbie all over the world. It's like $1 billion movie. And I know
Yeah,
that I saw,
first female directed $1 billion movie.
wow, that's amazing. Because I know when I was watching it, I was thinking, I can't believe a woman made this movie. It's like, no, I want to talk about
So
that.
good. And it was funny too, right? Women don't have a sense of humor. So, yeah.
Exactly. Right. They're such good multitaskers, but, to make this movie, so no, I
Very
wanted to
much.
talk about like the reaction to the movie and your reaction because I've seen it twice. Love the movie. Plan to watch it again whenever it's streaming. And all these conservatives are all worked up about it. And it's like even the like progressives are all like, this is such an anthem for anti-patriarchy. And I'm just like, it's just a funny movie. Like, chill out. Like, it's just a well-written, funny movie. Everybody needs to calm down, right? But let's talk. What do you think of Barbie?
Well, so first of all, are there that many people who are putting down the movie? Because it is a $1 billion grossing movie. And um, everybody I know who's seen it has enjoyed it. And maybe I live in a, tiny progressive bubble, but it feels like we're giving a lot of attention to a vocal minority of people who either want attention or, I mean, talk about not having a sense of humor. Like, really don't have a sense of humor about themselves or about the world in general. Because every time I go on Instagram or, some kind of social media like that, I'm only on Instagram. Um, I see people posting like, oh, these men are bothered by Barbie and blah, 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 and they can't take a joke and yada, yada, yada. And to me, it feels like we're giving a vocal minority a whole lot of attention, which is interesting and ironic because the film is about the amount of attention that we give to a small number of people and the amount of power that we give to a small number of people or to a minority really of people, when we should be paying attention to all the people who love the movie, who think it's funny, who think it's progressive, who think that it's finally saying what they've been thinking and maybe haven't had the words to say and put into words exactly the way, you think like, oh yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I've been trying to form into some kind of a cohesive sentence in the last whatever. So, so I think that I wonder how many people actually have seen the movie and didn't like the movie. And I wonder how many of these people who are complaining about the movie have actually watched the movie. And if there's that many of them, really, and if we're just giving attention again to a tiny vocal minority when we should like not feed them that energy. The more energy we feed people who are just out to be contrary and to hate on something, the more energy we feed them, the bigger they get, right? So I think if we just kind of ignore that and focus on the positive, which there's a lot of positive about this film. So you saw it twice
Yeah.
with your daughter, right?
Yeah, we saw it twice and it was funny. I was not offended once. In fact, a lot of the commentary was true. Like it was like it's exactly what men think. It's exactly what men do. It's exactly how men move in the world. And I wasn't offended because it's funny. You know, if it's true and it's funny, just go with it. And I wasn't
Well,
like, oh, I can't believe these people are trying to like take away male power. And, you know, it's like, it's not what it was. It was also male empowering too. It allows men to not feel as though they have to be these super masculine, aggressive people and dominate, that there's actually room for sharing roles and emotions and feelings, and that's okay. And of course, it's up to everybody to figure out with their partners how they're gonna be and, you know, associate with each other. But I just thought the writing was really good, and I can appreciate really good writing no matter what it's about. That's just like normal stuff. But what'd you like about it?
well, and I don't think it's making fun of men. It's making fun of the patriarchy, which doesn't serve anybody. And that's the point of any kind of system of hegemony, no matter who is at top of that system of hegemony, so a system of power. It's never going to serve even the people that it pretends to serve. So we live in a patriarchy that pretends to serve men, but it doesn't. It limits them in the same way that it limits everybody else in the patriarchy. It puts them into a box that says that they can't be emotional, that they can't cry, that, you know, all the stereotypical stuff that we say men can't do. I mean, that doesn't serve them because they're human beings that have a whole range of emotions. It's one of the reasons that we have such toxic relationships with sex in general. You know, we have toxic relationships on both for, you know, and I'm talking in a strict binary with male and female right now, but because that's the way our culture and our patriarchy sets things up, to be on a binary between male and female. But we have this, you know, old idea that women are supposed to not like sex very much, protect their sex and sexuality and hold on to it. And it's only supposed to be for very, very special people and yada, yada, yada. So this idea that somehow it's something that women are supposed to, you know, to cling to and protect, whereas men are supposed to be virile and want to have sex with everything that walks by them. And so you have these very toxic relationships with sex to begin with, where we're both like on opposing sides of, one is just constantly going for it and the other is like in this super protective mode. But if you think about how men relate to sex, it has to do with, like, it's their only outlet for intimacy. It's their only way that they can actually be intimate in this patriarchal system that says they can't cry, they can't show emotion. So the only time that they actually get to be close to somebody or feel any kind of emotion is when they're having sex. So, like, it's the only permissible outlet of emotion for men. And that, again, doesn't serve anybody. It creates a toxic relationship with sex and sexuality. It creates a very confining way of relating to the world for men. So I don't think the movie is making fun of men. I think it's making fun of a system that doesn't serve any of us. And if we had a matriarchy, if we had any kind of system of hegemony, is going to hurt everybody, because it's a system of power. It's a specific system of power that puts people into boxes and doesn't recognize their individuality, et cetera, et cetera. And in the long run, it hurts us. It hurts us emotionally, it hurts us with intimacy, and it hurts us with meeting our ultimate like what we're most capable of, because it doesn't celebrate us as individuals. It doesn't celebrate anything, really. A system of hegemony doesn't celebrate anything that's not conforming to a very specific small box, which nobody fits into. So I don't think it's making fun of men. I think it's making fun of patriarchy. And the people who are upset by it either can't see that, or they just, again, are so emotionally stunted that this is one of the only ways that they can have an emotional outlet, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That even like the complaining about something is like one of the only ways that they feel okay having an emotional output, if that makes sense. So
yeah, no, everything there makes sense, and it's really, really thoughtful. And this idea that there's two opposites, especially around the idea of sex, is very pervasive in our society, and there are, men have to live kind of in fear, good men all the time, about how they're perceived if they are, too nice, or, if they're too sensitive, like if you're sensitive with another dude, people are going to think something about you. If you're sensitive with a woman, they're going to think, oh, you're trying to, romance her, or you're trying to make her seem like you're one of those sensitive guys, and it's always through the like lens of what are men's aspirations, and then it's also, well, were you able to convince her or break her down, or was she able to finally, let her guard down so that you could, whatever, partner. And so that's a thing you have to deal with all the time, especially like, it's obviously, I would say 100% women have to deal with things much worse in society, but men also have to deal with this constant thing of, you are a predator. Like, you are out for one thing. And even if you're not, you're pretending like you're not, but you really are, and that's just like wrong. That's a lot of pressure too. And I'd be happy if I never had to kill another spider in my life, like,
why are you killing
everybody
spiders?
hates the patriarchy until there's the big spider. It's like, Josh,
Outside.
what?
I put spiders outside when I find spiders.
No. I do too. Okay. But sometimes they're in a spot and they're big and they're near places, and you just got to do what you have to do.
No, unless
I'm
it's
not manly if I don't kill it, Geordie. Like, do you understand the pressure that I'm on?
The spider's just trying to survive like everybody.
Oh my God, I just dropped this many levels with you. This is gonna be our last podcast. Return to sender emails after this. No, have you never killed a spider, Geordie?
I mean, I'm sure I've killed a spider in my life, but I opt for the putting them outside. Even the black widows, which maybe I shouldn't say this outside because people might get upset, but like, I found a couple black widows in the last month or so, front door, and then in my daughter's shoe. It was in her Birkenstock, hanging onto the underneath the strap.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, both of them I like just walk way out and put out in a bush, because why should we especially kill things that we think of as dangerous, like black widows or rattlesnakes or whatever, because they're dangerous to us, but we're everywhere, and these species are just trying to survive, and we're cutting down their numbers and targeting them simply because they appear more dangerous to us. It doesn't serve our ecosystem in the way that in the long run. So anyway, no, I avoid killing spiders, and I leave spiders alone unless they're black widows, and then I move them away for, because what if somebody gets bit?
Yeah, and they die because of it.
Then it's my fault.
I have so like, I'm with you, but if there's a black widow, it's over. There's no saving the black widow in my house. But
Anyway.
let's talk about, see how bad I feel now? I shouldn't feel that bad, I should be okay. No.
About killing the spiders. Well, so before the spider tangent, I was going to say that we have this tendency to kind of compare oppressions whenever we're talking about anything, whether it's like ethnicity or gender or whatever. We want to compare and be like, I know that it's much worse but comparing oppressions doesn't really serve anybody either. Again, it pits us against each other instead of looking at the real issue, which is the structure of power that's putting us all in these confined boxes. So yes, like, it's always going to be worse for somebody else, but the more we say, I know it's much worse for you, but for me, I feel, we're not joining forces and looking at the real issue, which is the structure of power that's confining all of us. So it is bad for you to feel like the predator. And in some ways, women are framed as the predator if it's the predator who's looking to take your money, or the predator who's looking to like catch you. I mean, catching, that's like literally what they say in Fiddler on the Roof. Yenta is like, you got to catch a man is for catching. So that's predatory as well. It's this predatory, you're constantly on the offensive to figure out, what do you want from me? And is it really about me, or are you just looking for some other form of protection, whether it's financial protection or physical protection or whatever the things are we're supposed to offer each other. So yeah, that kind of like looking at each other as, okay, how are we oppressed by this system? That's good, as long as we're focusing our energy on the system rather than trying to compare ourselves with each other. Because again, we're then further serving the patriarchy or the system of white supremacy or whatever system of hegemony that we're looking at by dividing and work and comparing to each other rather than thinking about that system and how harmful it is to all of us. So yes, being a predator.
Exactly. Yes. I want to ask you about a little bit of the movie. And remember, these are dolls, right? Like in the movie, there's no sex, there's no kissing,
No
like,
genitals.
they're dolls. So it's incredible that all of these issues arose when, like, Barbie's not a sex object; she's a doll, right? And so that's the whole point of the movie is, even dolls have pressures. But America Ferrera, or we put pressures on whatever. America Ferrera, she's got that big scene, right? Where she's like outlining what it means to be a woman and how you're expected to be this and not this. You are a mom. You deal with all this all the time, right? You've had to raise a child and work and struggle and make money, but be present, and all these pressures that you're put on in your workplace and everything. What'd you think of her speech? Could you relate to it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that any woman could relate to it, regardless of who you're parenting with or how many people or whatever. I think that I think that she touched on so many different points of what it is, like what's the word? It's like you're never safe. You're never in a role or in a place where you can just relax because you're confident enough, because you don't want to be too confident, or you're independent enough because you don't want to be too independent. It's threatening. And, going back, this like swaying back and forth. So she very much touches on the fluidity is a nice word. I don't want to say fluidity. She very much touches on it's almost like the gaslighting that society does for women, but for everybody. It's telling us that we're never good enough, no matter how good we are or how not good we are. It's just saying like you can never relax because you are never at a point where you're good enough. And I think that whole speech that she goes through touches on like every I think every woman who has seen it recognizes at least half of it.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I would assume men as well, like men kind of feel that as well. No?
I cried during that scene, and I wasn't really crying for women. I was crying for myself because it applies in the same way. Just, you can tweak it a little bit and that sort of thing. Men, again, I'm comparing here, but men generally probably don't have to worry about their weight as much and physical appearance, or at least they don't put that pressure. A big man is he's a big dude, and men can look a certain way and carry their weight, but there's so many pressures on women to be a certain look, to be attractive. And that was like, well, I have a daughter, so that part of it, I'm like, yeah, you don't want people judged, for that, as a whole person. You don't want them discriminated for that. Mm-hmm. But just the pressures of being never quite feeling comfortable and settled in. And we've talked about this on our parenting podcast. It's like, my whole thing is I'm a present dad, and I pick my kids up and I drop them off, and I'm there all the time. And I got to be there for every little second, right? And that's really not like other dads that I've ever known. Most of them are money. It's mom's role. Give them money. They're happy. That's what they enjoy, And I'm like, I don't like that. Like, I quit a million jobs because I'm like crying at my desk thinking, I need to be at pickup, kind of thing. And so that's a thing, right? Like I shouldn't have to be considered less than the investment banker where the guy who moves around money for rich people and he becomes rich because of it. Like that's really how we value society. That person's paid a lot, whereas what I do is paid less, you know? So those are those kind of things that really bug me and bother me. But I thought her speech was fantastic. It was great. You know, it's so touching and I read this article, you know, she did it a whole bunch of times, you know, just trying to like nail it and practice it. Did you ever play with Barbies, Geordie?
I wasn't allowed to play with Barbies, and I'll come back to that in just one second. But what you said about your role as a man, I mean, that's one of the issues with the patriarchy is that women have all these different roles they're supposed to fill, right? Like good partner, good mother, good daughter, good blah blah blah. Like they're supposed to be good cooks, they're supposed to be able to do all these different domestic things, but men have one role. Their one role is to make money. So if you fail at that, then you fail as a man, right? So a woman can fail, like I don't have to be a great cook or I don't have to be a great something, but I can say like, oh, but I do these other things very well. Like there's a lot more allotted when we're talking about what society says women are supposed to be. There's a lot more that women are supposed to be, which again is too much. It's like I have to be this and I have to be that and I have to be that and I'm never good enough. But at the same time, the role that men have, one role to make money. Doesn't matter how you make that money. You could be, you know, I don't know, murdering puppies.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would make you any money, but you could be doing some terrible, despicable thing. Or like you said, it's while investment bankers serve a role in our society, I don't think it's a great mark of character that you don't do anything, you don't make anything, you're not contributing in any way except to like multiply this like somebody else's bank account. But that's a very stressful thing, I'm sure, for men, and that's a very confining part of the patriarchy is that your one role is to make money, and if you don't make money, if you don't make a lot of money or any money, you failed. And that must be crushing. Must be a terrible thing to feel that, and it might be the reason that you feel the need to constantly show on Instagram how much time you spend with your kids, which again is good, but it might be part of that where it's like, look, I'm still like, this is what I'm choosing this. Anyway, that's a little psychoanalysis of you.
We could be here all day doing that. So.
And your Instagram feed.
We just go post by post. This one Josh is really feeling. Just kidding.
I wasn't allowed to play with Barbie because she's too sexy. It's funny because you said she's not a sexual doll, and has no genitals. But yeah, my mother especially, I don't think my dad cared that much about this, but my mother had this view of femininity that I think a lot of women, maybe from her generation, had this idea that feminine, and actually a lot of women still have, that femininity is bad, that femininity is what traps us in discrimination, and that we need to act like men and look like men. I wasn't allowed to have long hair. All my clothes were like hand-me-downs from like OP corduroy shorts, and like they were all just a bunch of t-shirts that said random things on them that I'm sure, well, I know came out of like a bag of hand-me-downs. So I wasn't allowed to look feminine, and I definitely wasn't allowed to play with things that were feminine. So I wasn't allowed to play with Barbie, but I loved Barbie. Like I somehow got hold of a Barbie and a Skipper doll. I think my sister gave me the Skipper doll, but that's it. I had them, and I had like a plastic tub that I turned into the Barbie car, and I had some shoe boxes that I stapled together and made into a Barbie house. I don't know if this sounds really, really sad or a sign of creativity, but yeah, I have always loved everything feminine, which is probably that plus not being able to be feminine and being told it was a terrible thing, is probably why I'm such a feminine adult. Even my tattoos, which are thought of as masculine, are like a bunch of flowers and birds and butterflies and stuff. So
pink,
and they're all pink. Yeah, there's a whole lot of pink in there. Yeah, so I wasn't allowed to play with Barbie, but just like I wasn't allowed to watch television, I found a way and really loved them and loved I think what I mean, I can't speak for all little girls, but I think what I liked about it was just imagining myself as an adult, and I think that that's part of what Barbie's supposed to be, is imagining yourself as an adult and thinking what kind of life you could have.
Mhm.
And if you have an especially dreary, sad, awful life when you're a child, that has a lot of power to it, figuring out like where you can go and when you're going to get there and how you're going to have control over that. So I think for me, that's what Barbie was first of all, was a rebellion. Playing with Barbie was a rebellion because femininity was this terrible thing and I wasn't allowed to play with her. But also imagining what I could do, where I could go, and how there might be a whole other world away from the world that I lived in when I was little. So yes and no. How about you? Did you play with Barbies?
No, but I have more than 100 WWE action figures still to this day that I may or may not still play with, but definitely did play with as a youngster. And I mean, I love playing with dolls or action figures because it's just characters and stories and role playing. And, it's like, yes, people will think, oh, fighting, but that's not really what muscular dolls are necessarily doing. It's storylines, it's characters. But no, I didn't have any female dolls. I have a much older sister, but there were never dolls in the house at all. But yeah, I think it's important to have like those kind of, I think our childhoods were similar. I know they are in some ways, from what we've talked about, but it's a portal into a world that you would someday like to be in, or at least imagine that something exists outside of your, closet or four walls and locked door, that, oh, I could be this person, one day. And so that was good. I never really had much thoughts on Barbie other than she was this like horribly unattainable, physically looking person. Like no woman would ever look like that. But of course they came out with all these others, and in the movie there's various versions of that. And I always thought Ken was sort of plain, like kind of a boring white dude. Like I never wanted to look like Ken, obviously. It was not my aspiration because he's so like normal and average and perfect, which is boring, but no, I never bought a Ken doll or anything like that. Before we go ahead, I don't know, do you want to say anything or I wanted to move on?
Oh, I was going to say one of the criticisms of Barbie is often that unattainable body, and that like if she was a real person, she'd fall over and all that kind of stuff.
No.
And I think that's true. And that's not something to dismiss, that we set these ridiculous expectations. But at the same time, when you're a little girl, all women's bodies are unattainable to you. You know what I mean? Like when you're a little girl and you haven't gone through puberty, you haven't developed yet, all women's bodies seem like some kind of a fantasy. So I'm not dismissing that her body is ridiculous, and we know all that, but at the same time, I don't know if that's not adult women projecting onto little girls as much as little girls, at least me, when I was little, saw like all those adult bodies as something like you didn't have yet, so you couldn't really imagine what it was going to look like or how it was going to look. And I don't think I grew up thinking I need to look like Barbie. I was way more influenced by my mother and her never eating, never ate. She never ate solid. She drank and like never exercised either. And other images that you see over and over again, and the way that women talk to each other and little girls pick up on how women talk to each other and then create, I mean, that's what really affected my body dysmorphia. My image, like, I don't think it was Barbie. I think it was, and so maybe Barbie reinforces that, but maybe she's really a reflection of that. So yeah, those two things. I think she's a reflection of our ridiculous expectations of women's bodies. I don't think she reinforces them as much as we think. And I think that little girls see all women's bodies as something that like is far off from them. So if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's definitely a good context. And now that I think about it, there was much more male bodies shown in that movie than female. Like I can picture Kent and Ryan Gosling's abs and chest really well right now, but I can't remember Barbie at all being like not wearing clothes, maybe like her legs and part of it. But so it's interesting in the Barbie movie, the men were sexualized probably more than the women.
Well, yeah, and that was, I think, a big part of Barbie Land was everything was opposite, right? Women were in control, women were the construction workers, they were the president, and men were objectified. And there's that line that the voiceover says something like, Barbie is happy all the time. Ken is happy when Barbie notices
Looks at him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the opposite of what happens in our world. Again, like what the expectation of like women are there as objects for admiration. And so we feel most validated when admired. Whereas it's a different expectation for men. So yeah, I think that was part of it, is that they were supposed to be objectified because they were in that bizarro world.
Right. And that incredibly fake hair that Ryan Gosling had. But before we move on from Barbie, I want to talk about Sinead O'Connor next. And did you have any final thoughts, anything you wanted to say that we didn't talk about as it relates to the movie and anything that affected you? Or did Ruby like the movie in the same way you did? Or was her impression?
Yeah, she liked it a lot. She liked it for the same reasons, I think.
Yeah. Because depending on generations, you sort of see different things in the movie, and the music was fantastic,
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely I'm going to see that movie. Probably that's going to be Willy Wonka on the Chocolate Factory level and Clueless level for me. Like in Heathers, I'm going to be watching that movie the rest of my life, every time I can.
Yeah, no, me too, for sure.
So we often, what's that?
Sinead.
Yeah, we often talk about music, and Sinead O'Connor recently died, and obviously everyone knows the Nothing Compares to You song. And do you remember that video where it's just her face and and everyone was like, speaking of patriarchy, it was like, wow, she's so pretty with no hair. Like not a lot of women could pull that off. Like remember that whole conversation?
Or it was, why would someone so pretty shave their head? You know, that was like, why would you do that to yourself when you're so pretty? And yeah. So I definitely remember Sinead. I definitely remember that video, SNL, the Pope, all the stuff that came after that. I was young when all of that happened. When did that happen? That was her second album, which is like 1989-ish.
It was definitely 80s. There was The Emperor's New Clothes, I remember, because I bought the album and was royally disappointed in every other song on the album except for that one. But that's because,
Prince wrote it.
What's that?
Because Prince wrote it?
Well, probably, but no, probably just because, she wasn't like a top 40 artist, she just had a big hit and she was a very different kind of an artist. But yeah, that was probably like 89, VH1, watching it back then.
Yeah. So, so what did you think of her no longer being here? And
well, okay, so when these celebrities die, particularly the 80s ones and 90s, when I was fully had no other commitments and was just into everything new in pop culture, I feel it, right? Obviously, when George Michael died, like on Christmas Day, I was like, this is one of the saddest days of my life that does not affect my family. Like, this is the saddest I could ever be for a celebrity,
Yeah.
So sad.
On Christmas. He loved Christmas, apparently. Like, besides that song, he like really liked Christmas. Apparently, it was a big thing for him. So, yeah. Anyway.
And Last Christmas, his song, but anyway, and speaking of men and weight, like this is a guy who was beautiful in the 80s, right? Like this total sex symbol, the perfect face. And then, when he died, or, toward the end, it was always like, look how fat he is. Look how much weight he's gained. And, he died bloated. And it's just like, oh my God, it's just like, can we let these people be who they are? He's a drug addict, tried not to be a drug addict, and so people eat a lot. Anyway, George Michael, just totally, it's sad. Every time I hear, Careless Whisper on K-Light, I'm just like, Whitney Houston, obviously, Prince dying in an elevator. Like, are you kidding me? How could this happen? Why is Madonna still around? She figured it out. But anyway, Sinead O'Connor, it made me think of like those days and how, like, I listened to that song, like Ice Ice Baby for Vanilla Ice, like over and over and over, right? Those are just like these songs were just like, wow. And I knew she was sort of this progressive, this activist, went against the grain, and her career kind of tanked after she ripped the Pope in half on Saturday Night Live. Mm-hmm. But I guess I was just sort of like curious as to why we didn't care about her for a while. And then all of a sudden she was the original feminist icon, Right. And so I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, that's what we do over and over again is we ignored, she was too uncomfortable. So I've been reading her memoirs this week. And she was uncomfortable. She made people uncomfortable because she was so she tears up that picture of the Pope, right? And that's after she has 2 albums. Her second album is the one she had the big hit that Prince wrote. And people pay attention to her because they're like a pretty bald woman. And she tears up that picture of the Pope. And I had heard, and I think I heard this from my sister, which I should learn to erase anything I've heard from my sister, that it was because of the Pope's stance on birth control, that birth control was this, like for a long time, the Catholic Church was like, birth control is bad, don't do it. But then after she died, suddenly it's like, no, she did that because of molestation and child abuse in the church. And I thought that just seems too convenient to say now, because wasn't that kind of early? Like the people didn't know about that, but she was Irish and Catholic. And so maybe she knew a bunch of people who were molested. But so as I've been reading her memoir, she was very badly abused growing up. Like she grew up in a very, very abusive household. Her mother sounds like a sadist. And I think that when you grow up like that, it's hard to recover, for one, but 2, the way I feel anyway, is you kind of have a throw your worst at me because I've already been through a whole lot and know what it's like to be in a lot of pain one way or another. So I just don't care. And I'm just going to throw as much out there as possible, and it might make you uncomfortable. And I think that's what she was like as an adult, is that she made people uncomfortable because she had that kind of, screw them if they can't take a joke kind of attitude, where she just put it all out there. And I think that's why people shut her down and ignored her for years and years, and kind of said, like, she's just a little off, she's one of those people you don't want to get in a conversation with because they're going to start to just make you uncomfortable. So I think that's why we ignored her. And I think that's why people ignore people in general. George Michael was ignored for years and years too, because he was, like you said, chunky and unattractive, and we liked him as singing Faith. We liked him like shaking his tushy and looking like a cutie on MTV. And once he started being more emotional and writing more honest stuff and like chunking out a little bit, we're like, that makes us uncomfortable, we don't want to look at it. And then he dies, and it's like, oh, suddenly you have all this emotion for somebody because they can no longer threaten you, because you can create whatever story you want, whatever narrative you want about who they were, and turn them into that. And that's what I felt like people were kind of doing with she was protesting the Pope and molestation, and the way the Catholic Church tried to hide all of that. Like, they're changing her narrative into something that makes her a martyr and a hero. And I think she was a martyr and a hero. I think she was both of those things. But I think that's why we see people suddenly paying so much attention to her, because she now can fill a role where we can project all this feminist ideology onto her, and it's safe because she's gone, won't be able to make us uncomfortable anymore.
It's so interesting too, these like one hit wonders and radio. It's just so interesting how some artists are able to continually get airplay and others kind of drift and fade away. And I think a lot of people could probably not name 5 Sinead O'Connor songs, but that song was so good and just overplayed, but it's part of our pop culture. Oh, I have one for you. And this is going live without a net here, Geordie. We didn't talk about this ahead, but I just thought about this. Tracy Chapman, Fast Car, right? You've heard that song, okay? Right?
Of course. I have that.
What's that?
I have the record.
Yeah. Great, amazing song. But along these lines, right? Luke Combs, is that his name? Yeah, he's the country singer. He had #1 hit with Fast Car, like this summer. I don't know. Have you heard it? You probably haven't heard it because you're not listening to the country music. Yeah. And so he had a hit, #1. And so all this conversation about how like people were getting mad at Luke Combs, the chubby white country boy who makes really good country music. You took her song, obviously had permission and everything, but he changed the meaning, which is sort of this. Well, there's lots of interpretations, but some people sort of say it's like a lesbian relationship and they're fleeing and they're leaving, their conditions. And Luke Combs is over there like, just a love song, for him. But he made it into #1 song, right? And it was #1 before, it's #1 now. And so it's just so interesting how we these songs have this meaning for us. Nothing Compares to You, written by Prince. Sinead O'Connor gets the attention. Tracy Chapman, this incredible Fast Car song, and then you should listen to the country version because it is really good. But it's just funny because it's like, does it have the same meaning if Luke Combs is singing it as opposed to her
as opposed to a woman, right? So that song, well, and Fast Car was huge when it came out. I mean, that's what put Tracy Chapman on the map. I think she had lots and lots of other great songs, but I think people know her for Fast Car. But a man changing that kind of changes the story or the takeaway from it, because it's about this person who's destitute and takes care of their dad because their mom leaves, and then kind of doesn't have a whole lot of hope in life, financial promise, and is just kind of clinging on to the idea of this relationship that they have with somebody and hoping that is going to take them out of their poverty. And it doesn't. It just sinks this person further and further into their poverty. And because, again, what we were talking about earlier, the way that the patriarchy sets up that women are there for all these different reasons, but men are there to be like the financial stability, it kind of it changes the story if it's a man looking for that from a partner, I guess.
Yeah. It was just me because there were all these backlash against country music for saying he shouldn't be able to do that. And he turned into this big #1 hit again. And what are these people relating to? And my whole thing is just like, it's still her song. Like, she wrote this amazing song and it can transcend musical genres. Yeah. And she took it. I mean, her song's the best, of course, but his is really good too in a totally different way. Do you like the Prince version of Nothing Compares to You more than
I love that. Yeah, I love it. And there's a couple Prince versions. There's a live version, and then there's one that he did a recording of it. And I love that one too. And again, that song, when coming from her, this woman who's left by her partner and who really, and now, you have this freedom. That's one big part of the song that kind of rings differently, having her sing it versus him sing it, because in the song you're talking about like, he left and now I can do all this stuff. Like, I have the freedom to go out and hang out with whoever I want. And that's different coming from somebody who's female versus coming from someone who's male, who's saying like, yeah, I can put my arms around anybody. I can go to any dinner. it's not better or worse. It's just a slightly different message because I don't know, there's more attention to women's fidelity in general, I think, in relationships, and how women interact with men in a relationship versus a woman. I'm not saying that there's not pressure on men to be faithful and et cetera, but throughout history, there's been more leniency with men having like dalliances outside of a relationship or something, because they're this idea that like, oh, they have this biological urge, whereas women aren't supposed to like sex. So if you have some kind of a dalliance outside of a relationship, then that's speaks stronger to your character. So anyway, I think
it's a layer of sensitivity with Prince, like everything when he sings, like he has that song, If I Was Your Girlfriend. Do you remember that song by Prince? Like that's another one where it's like, it's still, when I listen to it, I'm like, what does he mean? Like, I get what he means, but it's like, all this stuff is like two girls who are girlfriends, like besties, can do these things in front of each other. But here he's the boyfriend and she has to be like, no, don't look at me, I'm changing, and he's like, I've already seen you naked. Why are you acting so weird? And he's like, what if I was your girlfriend? You wouldn't care, and so that's what Prince does so well, is just sort of like gender bend, and sort of take meanings and apply them to himself, for sure. But so when Sinead O'Connor died, just to wrap this up, did you have a heart, did your heart hurt for this? Were you sad? You obviously been reading about her lately. What was your reaction?
Oh, yeah. Ruby said, my daughter said, Sinead O'Connor died. And I was like, what? So yes, I definitely had a reaction to it. And because I remember, I mean, again, I was younger. I was probably, I don't know, 5th or 6th grade when that song came out. But I just remember the attention to her being bald, and that people were just blown over by her being bald. And I remember kind of observing that when I was a little kid and thinking like, why are people so attached to hair? Like, I wasn't allowed to have my hair long. Other people weren't allowed to have their hair short. Like, what is our attention to women, especially, and hair? It's one of the first ways that we control women and teach them the opposite of consent. Like, we tell them they can't cut their hair, they have to cut their hair. Like, they can't dye it. So the thing that I noticed the most, and again, I heard that song over and over and over again, but it was just this attention to her hair. And it was one of the first times I think I was really cognizant of how much control people feel over a woman's body. And if she deviates from the norm at all, it becomes this like huge focus for people from like all different walks of life who suddenly feel, and again, of course, this happens to men as well, but more so with women, this focus on like, you're deviating from the norm. Why would you do that? How are you doing that? What is the purpose of doing this? Why would you put yourself in that position? When it's none of your business. Like, why is it so threatening? So for me, she stood out when I was younger because it was one of the first times I paid attention to or kind of noticed how much focus goes on a woman when she deviates from the norm. And then when she ripped up that picture of the Pope, I mean, I didn't care. Like, I wasn't Catholic. I barely even knew what the Pope was, but the attention to it and the like, oh my God, it's like, who cares? Who cares? It's a picture. It's literally symbolic. Why are we so upset with this symbolic tearing up of this picture? And why aren't we paying attention to why she did it? Like, why do we have this strong focus on the tearing up of, instead of saying like, what'd you do this for? Like, what is the purpose of this? But again, she made people uncomfortable because she deviated from the norm so much. So nobody was going to ask her that because they didn't want to hear the answer.
Mm-hmm. And you could say she made bald women beautiful too, right? I'm sure some men were like, wow, I need to stop looking at women by the length of their hair, and they're actually beautiful whether they have long hair or not. I'm sure there's some men too who, like, her doing that kind of opened men's eyes to like, oh, that's so stupid. Why would I judge a woman by the length of her hair? Look at this person,
And in her memoir, by the way, she talks about why she does that. It's because the studio executives wanted her to start to be more feminine. She was like very punk looking, and she had short hair and stuff. And somebody was like they kept telling her to grow her hair out and wear, like, instead of wearing Doc Martens, wear, more feminine shoes and blah blah blah. And she was complaining about it with a friend, and the friend was like, you should just shave your head. So she did. And she went to a barber, and the barber didn't want to do it without her dad's permission. She was like 20 years old.
Honey, oh my
And
goodness.
yeah, and the barber was like, your dad's going to come and get mad at me, and I can't shave your head. And she was in London, and her dad's in Dublin, and she's like, you're going to be fine, just shave my head. So like this person wouldn't even allow her that consent over her body. I mean, that's not to go off on a tangent, but like, we tell women in so many different ways, young girls in so many different ways, that they don't know how to consent to behavior with their body. We tell them what they can wear for a long time. We don't let them dress themselves. We pick out their outfits, or we have opinions over their outfits, or we have opinions about their hair, how long their hair should be, how they can style it. From a very young age, that's an opportunity to teach them consent. If we allow them to have their hair the way that they want it, dye their hair if they want it, wear the clothes that they want, we're teaching them that that is consent over their body, that what they're okay with is, this is what it is. I'm okay with my hair like this. I'm okay with my clothing like this. But we teach them that they don't have the reasoning skills, the capability of making decisions over their own hair length. And then we throw them out in the world, and we're like, here, you go decide what's appropriate behavior, what's inappropriate behavior. And they're like, I don't know, like, I don't, like, I'm not even allowed to figure out my hair on my own. So of course people don't understand consent. Anyway, so that was Sinead O'Connor to me. A first lesson on how much attention we pay to a woman who deviates from the norm, and how much it scares us. Mm-hmm. And I was sad that say I was sad she died sounds trivial, but I'm sad we didn't pay more attention to her throughout her life.
Yes, she should have started a podcast and just releasing her own songs, on her own. And we could have had her. That's the great thing about our modern technology, is these celebrities can kind of just do that, and they don't really need the record labels anymore. Pee Wee Herman died too recently, and
yeah, I really liked Pee Wee Herman too. Pee Wee's Playhouse was weird. Like, was that really made for kids? It seemed like a kid, like a adult soft porn dressed in a kid show, like some kind of fetish, playhouse fetish. That's what from when I watched that show when I was a little kid, I don't think I had the words fetish in my head, but I definitely felt that. Like Sandra Bernhard is in it, she's,
oh really? Uh-huh.
Yeah, she plays like the operator or some, he calls and he'll get, I can't remember what her name was, and she was always making these like sexual innuendos, and he'd be like or whatever that laugh was.
Well, I mean, it's another one though. We talk about like pioneers, groundbreakers. Like, here's this little man, skinny man, playing a role in this little suit, obviously kind of odd and weird, and what everyone would say about him. I wonder if he's this, and he did that and created a successful character. I didn't watch Pee-wee's Playhouse, but I did watch his movies. The Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is so funny. It's like when he's arguing with Francis, and he's being a little kid. And so another one, it's so sad to watch these people that we grew up watching die.
Wasn't he canceled at some point?
Yeah, I think he got caught in a movie theater
masturbating. Was he masturbating in a movie theater? And like, that was the end of him. Everybody was like forgot about him until he died. And then it's like, oh, Pee-wee's Playhouse was so amazing. And it's it's the same. It's like suddenly somebody dies and they were your best friend and the biggest influence in your life. Although, I've never heard you mention them or.
Right. He was a pervert for the last 20 years of his life, but now he was, a groundbreaker in Saturday morning television or whatever it was,
Yeah.
So let's talk about something a little or a lot more serious. And I had mentioned this to you recently, but I'm a journalist. I'm very much focused on what I'm focused on, local news, and the media presents stories relative to what they think people will be most interested in. And then there's a lot of unrest that goes on all across the whole world that we don't necessarily know about in the mainstream until it reaches a peak, or there's something major that happens. And although I know that Haiti forever has had a lot of political unrest and poverty and horrible conditions and lack of money and government structure, you're kind of aware, like, oh yeah, that's Haiti, right? But recently, it seems to have gotten worse, at least in the eyes of the news coverage. And there was a kidnapping of a mother and a daughter. And I read some articles and found out that one of the only ways that anyone can make any money is through ransom, through kidnapping. And so this happens. And it just made me sort of like go down a rabbit hole of researching what's going on, because the other side of the island is the Dominican Republic, and they're not in the same situation, and it's just geography, and you are Ms. Geography. So Geordie, what's your take sort of on the latest sort of news regarding Haiti, and maybe you can just take a couple minutes to educate me and the audience about
Haiti,
how terrible it is there. The children, they're starving, there's no school.
Well, and what you were saying about ransom, that happens in places where you have an unofficial government, or you don't have an official government, or you have pockets that are outside of government control. So Colombia, for a long time, part of it was under control by the FARC, the FARC, and it was this unofficial government that worked out, that was still in Colombia, but was outside of the official, like the official government didn't have control. And that government supported their unofficial government by kidnapping people and asking for ransoms. And Somalia does a similar thing. Somalia has been in a state of anarchy. In fact, it's in a state of anarchy. It's in such a significant state of anarchy that part of it is broken off into what's called Somaliland, which isn't not a recognized political state, but again, they have like their own border in between Somaliland and the rest of Somalia. And Somalia has been in a state of anarchy for a while as well. And that's why a couple of years ago, we heard a lot about piracy, because you have ransoming, and then you have like the Suez, you're going by to get to the Suez Canal. I can't remember what percentage of trade in the world, global trade in the world, goes through there, but a significant percentage of global trade goes through the Suez Canal. You're going right by this country that's in a state of anarchy, and that was their income. That was like how they make money for a long time. So, and still do. So Haiti is a good case study of how geography is destiny, how geography can create, and how you can't escape your geography. So, to answer that question without going into like a 3-hour-long lecture, first of all, Haiti and Dominican Republic are on the island of Hispaniola, which is the island that Columbus first got to when he ran into the Americas. And it was one of the first colonized parts of the Americas. The reason that Europeans started to colonize the Americas is because Europe is all in the mid-latitudes. So it's all at 30 degrees and above. So the equator is 0 degrees, 30 degrees and above. And the mid-latitudes are where we grow a lot of staples. So the mid-latitudes have the seasonal variation and a whole lot of other things that make them perfect to grow annual plants that grow like in a year-long cycle. And annual plants are what we farm most around the world because they're easier to control. So Europe in the mid-latitudes had a good handle on annual plants, staples, wheat, mostly wheat, but they can't grow any of the things that you grow in the tropics. And what you grow in the tropics is like like the spice of life, literally and figuratively. It's spices, it's sugar, it's coffee, it's cocaine, it's cacao, it's like all the good stuff, you know, like you got your rice and your wheat in the mid latitudes, and like that'll take you through the day. But the fun of life, the cacao and the cocaine, that's all happening in the low latitudes around the tropics. So for a long time, Europe had been trading with countries in the low latitudes in Africa and in the rest of Asia for all that good stuff. And they were always at a trade deficit. They were never making enough that they could actually buy all the stuff. They were always on the low end. So when this, what's the word I want to use? When Columbus comes across ancient civilizations and 2 other continents, Europeans start to think, you know, instead of trading at a deficit, we could control this whole part of the world that's in the low latitudes, and we can grow the stuff that we're trading at a premium. And Portugal had already done it off the coast of Africa on an uninhabited island called Sao Tome. So they start to colonize specifically the Caribbean because it's this place where you can make a whole lot of money instead of losing at trade. And so Hispaniola is one of the first places that's colonized. Now, Hispaniola and all of these Caribbean islands are the tops of mountains. There's 2 mountain chains. So they're all a mountain. And what happens on a mountain is you have a wet side and you have a dry side because of something called orographic lifting. Dominican Republic is on the wet side. Haiti is on the dry side. Caribbean also has this whole, so there's 4 different tectonic plates that are like crushing into the Caribbean, coming together in the Caribbean. And so you have a lot of mountain building, you have earthquakes, you have volcanic eruptions, plus you're in Hurricane Alley. So you have a whole lot of hurricanes that come through there as well. So you're on the dry, so your country is a third of an island, that's Haiti. It's on the dry side of an island. It's going to get ravaged with earthquakes, with hurricanes, and you're already on a slope. And so that sets you up for ecological disaster. You are on the dry side, you get pummeled with an earthquake, you get pummeled with a hurricane, you're going to see landslides, debris flows, just taking your infrastructure out. Growing any kind of manufacturing, growing anything past agriculture is going to be very, very difficult. So there's that part of it. There's the physical geography part of it. And then there's the colonization part of it, where again, like I said, Europe wanted to colonize this part of the world because they wanted to basically get a jump on trade and stop trading at a deficit. And so what happens is they grow very, very labor intensive crops. They don't have enough Europeans willing enough or able to, like, they just don't have the sheer numbers that you need. And so you see the beginning of African slavery. And with the beginning of the enslavement of Africans, you have this like movement of people, this involuntary movement of people from Africa into the Caribbean. And you start to see the Caribbean populated with people who are involuntarily moved there and enslaved there. The Arawak people, the people who would have lived on Hispaniola, they fought or they died from disease or they left, right? That was their home turf. So you have this clearing out of indigenous people, you have this involuntary movement of Africans, and so you have very few Europeans who actually want to live there. The Caribbean is a hard place to live because of all the things I said, hurricanes, earthquakes, all that stuff, mosquitoes, malaria. The colonies that were in the mid-latitudes, like New York, had colonists who actually stayed, but in the Caribbean, it was mostly enslaved people. All right, so Haiti is the second free country in the Americas. So it's one of the first colonized. The US is the first to fight their war for independence. Haiti is the second. And Haiti doesn't just fight a war for independence, they fight a rebellion. It's a slave rebellion. So it's not just a war for independence fought by colonists, by colonizers, like it was here in the US. It was literally a slave rebellion. And it's the only successful slave rebellion in the history of the world. The only successful. The day that the war for independence started here in the US, there had already been 200 slave rebellions attempted here in the US. So being the only successful slave rebellion in the world is a big deal. when the French, who had colonized Haiti, finally said, all right, fine, have it. They let Haiti go, but they said, okay, you can have this country, we'll leave you alone, but you got to pay us back for all our property that we lost. And that includes you. So you have this group of people who had just fought the only successful slave rebellion in the history of the world, now have to pay France back for themselves. So they start their country out in debt. And again, this is a long time ago, but it's not really that long ago. So they start their country out in debt, and nobody will help them because the US feels kind of like the US at the time was the only other free country in the Americas. They weren't going to help them because it was a country that was now run by formerly enslaved people. And it looked very hypocritical because they were still enslaving people. So all these countries went along with this embargoing of Haiti until they paid France back. So they started their first 38 years or something like that, paying 80% of their GDP, 80% of the money they made in a year back to France. And what they did to pay that back is they just ravaged their countryside. They completely deforested, cut everything down, like really hurt their ecological future. So while that was a while ago, that why they're so impoverished has its roots there. That this is, again, the only successful slave rebellion in the world, but the post-rebellion and the beginning of independence for them was a very, very different road from, like, if you compare them to the US, because of trade relations, because of things that they were, that like the amount of money that they had to pay back. And then the ecological, what essentially, like the deforestation that comes with that really hurts them in the long run. So the answer to why is Haiti in this state of anarchy now starts there. It starts with the location. It starts with being on the dry side of an island. It starts with having a very difficult road to building a manufacturing core so that you're constantly reliant on agriculture, but you see this history of deforestation in order to pay the French back. So while we think of colonization as a long time ago, it's still very much hurting different countries because of political relationships that are created in the post-colonial era and because of the environmental damage that often happens in the post-colonial era. That plus the Cold War is where we get Haiti kind of still in this like cycle of poverty. And Haiti still, it's one of the only countries in the world that doesn't have a public school system. I think it's one of 3 in the world that doesn't have a public school system. So in order to go to school, everybody who goes to school has to pay, which means you have a whole lot of people who aren't able to go to school. There's a system of child slavery there. It's called the Restavek system that you have people who have a whole lot of kids. They can't afford to send them to school. They sell mostly their daughters into this system. Restavek in French, it's like to rest with, to stay with. So you have a lot of young girls, especially, who are sold into this system of child slavery, who end up abused and not educated, and it's just a mess. And so geography is very much the answer to why Haiti is in the position that it's in, but it's not so much their geography, it's what their geography has meant to the rest of the world and how that's impacted them. Does that make sense? That was a whole lot.
No, that's great. That's like, I'm going to watch that 10 times. But let me ask you this. US gets involved in conflicts from time to time. If we know that in Haiti, they don't have nuclear weapons, that there's just a total rebellion, that it's chaos, it's anarchy, that children are suffering and being trafficking, and there's no education system. And this is a very US centric viewpoint, but why wouldn't we go in there and like help and like change it? Because we would obviously be able to, but is that like an Iraq thing? You can go in there and clean house, but then once you leave, it's just going to come back? Or how do we have conditions like this in the world? And then here we are in the United States, and we're just like all complaining about, the latest
Barbie movie. Sorry, the dog is barking. We're complaining about Barbie and
or just complaining about, a lot of things that, relatively speaking, we're a lot more privileged to be living in the US. But I mean, do we just let Haiti be and it's just going to be like that forever? Or how do we help or fix? I mean, the last president was assassinated. So I don't know.
So that question people often have, like, do we go in and help every country because, we've done it in the past? I don't think that we've gone in, and this is going to get me, negative feedback on not being patriotic or whatever. But the U.S. has it's going into other countries has always been self-serving.
Yeah.
It's not going into Vietnam because it cares about the Viet Cong and the Vietnamese people. It's going in because they cared about having more resources so that they could win the Cold War. The Caribbean is, like I said, this I did that whole setup on colonization, but that's still what the world wants from the low latitudes, from the countries that are in the tropics. Those countries still serve as resource suppliers to the manufacturing and service-based economies that are in the mid-latitudes. So what's called the world systems theory, that you have core countries like the US, like countries in Europe, like Japan, countries that have a stronger economy that are all kind of in bed together. And resources flow from what we call the periphery. So the periphery would be countries like Haiti, who are still mostly based in agriculture or mining. Basically, they're taking what's in the ground and sending it to the core that manufactures and then consumes most of it. So this idea of, like, why do we let Haiti, or why do we let these countries kind of stay in the system of poverty? They're in that system of poverty because of us, because of the core, not just the US, but because of the strongest economies in the world. The strongest economies in the world want to keep them, or maybe don't even want to keep them in that system of chaos, but actions have prevented them from coming out of that system of chaos in order to keep resources coming cheap from the periphery and flowing to the core.
Mm-hmm.
So why we don't do anything about that? I mean, not only the US, but the core has caused that. The reason that we see dictators, for example, in the Caribbean and in Central America and in Latin America in general, all through the Cold War, we see like these people who come to power who are dictators, and they're being supported by the US. They're being backed by the US. Pinochet in Chile was backed by the US until he wasn't. Saddam Hussein was backed by the US until he wasn't. So as long as these people are serving to keep their population subservient and keep resources coming out for cheap, that's serving the core. So when we see countries like Haiti or the DR Congo or different places where they just seem to be in constant kind of chaos, and we think, like, why don't we help them? They're there because of us. They're there because of this system of things coming from the periphery, raw resources coming from the periphery, feeding the core. So that's why we don't help them, because it's serving a larger economic system. And that's not going to be a popular opinion, but it's not an opinion. It's yeah.
Well, why did God create the world this way, Geordie? I just don't understand.
I don't know. I think I think this is all on us. I don't think we can blame some other higher power.
Yeah, I think that they did release that mom and daughter. They're still alive. There was an outcome there, but as I was teaching in my one of my journalism classes at CSUN about journalistic oppression, and we were looking at Belarus and how it's illegal to run a newspaper. Like, you're not allowed to criticize the government, and so there's these rebel underground journalists who will start these publications and risk their lives to publish the news that's not making the government look good, and then they'll publish a story and then they'll disappear. Like, it's just like somebody else has got to come in now and do this, and just so much going on in the world that just, I'm sure people like you and others do focus on and do know that the most of the mainstream is shocked when they find out this is happening, like the oppression of the Iranian women. It's like that was last year, right? And it's still, and it's just so much bad going on in the world, and we kind of learn about them in spurts, but it's constant. It's everywhere all the time. Mexico is the worst place in the world to be a journalist, because they kill you, and they drug cartels will kill you, and worse, they'll kill your family, so it's like,
Well, yeah, and speaking of Iran, like Iran got a lot of attention last year, like you said, but I mean, Iran is still, it's not in a state of chaos like Haiti, but it's chaotic. I mean, Iranians here can't go home. Anybody who is coming from the US and trying to go to Iran is going to be detained most likely by the government and thought of as some sort of terrorist. Even people who are Iranian who live here can't go home right now. So yeah, I wonder if our concerns and our focus on things like the Barbie movie being anti-male is a way of just distracting us so we don't pay attention to all this chaos in the world, because that chaos actually, again, like I said, serves our economy. It doesn't serve it in the long run, just like burning fossil fuels is not going to serve us in the long run, but it does serve a small minority of people right now who control a whole lot of wealth. Yeah, so I wonder if we're distracted by these things because it's serving, again, a system of hegemony, a system of economic hegemony this time, instead of a cultural hegemony.
Yeah. We have a few more minutes, and this podcast has been awesome. It's like every segment is worth watching multiple times. But I want to ask you, speaking of colonization, last week there was Old Spanish Days, and I took my daughter down there a couple times, as you well know from Instagram, since a lot could be psychoanalyzed through my posts, apparently. But I like the eggs, but I don't like the crowds. I'm a total introvert. I mean, I can handle crowds and be normal. I don't like freak out or anything, but it's just not like my natural default. And it's a lot of people there, and a lot of people dressed up in flamenco dresses, or sort of like a tinge of flamenco to their normal clothes, a flower or a scarf or a hat or something like that. And, it's part of our Santa Barbara tradition. And so many generations have grown up participating in Fiesta, or enjoying Fiesta and appreciating it. And it's this huge moneymaker for the city as well. And one of the things that I don't understand, and I've never gotten a real clear answer from anyone other than just get over it, Josh. There's a new meaning to it now, and it's not that. And now all cultures come together for this incredible event. But I've never kind of understood how not me, but like we, meaning local officials, elected officials, activists, environmentalists, everybody who's really progressive, embraces this so much to the point where there's a lot of history here that we seem to ignore when we're celebrating Old Spanish Days. What do you think of this?
Well, yeah, like all that progressive ideology gets thrown out the window when Fiesta comes along, and I don't get it either. I don't understand Fiesta. I don't understand how, like you said, people celebrate it, and I don't get the point, because it's celebration of the colonization of California. That means the genocide of indigenous people here. And the whole flamenco dancing, the things that we associate with old Spanish days weren't actually a part of that Spanish colonialism. There were barely any women here. The women who were here were indigenous women who were being forced to labor for the Spanish. And this whole so California was a colony of Spain, and then part of Mexico, and then becomes part of the US. And nobody came here. People came here from Spain in very small numbers, and they settled along the coast, where the missions are. They're all supposed to be a day's walk from each other. And they were all about producing stuff and sending it back to the colony, to Spain. And then when Mexico has their war for independence, because this is a part of the Spanish colony, it becomes a part of Mexico. But again, Mexico couldn't get anybody to come up here. It's too far away. Mexico City was the center, the economic center, the population center. And there's a whole lot of mountains and a whole lot of desert in between us and them. And so they couldn't get people up here either. They couldn't get people to Texas. They offered land in Texas. Texas becomes Texas, its own country for a while, because Mexico was like, you can come here and have land. You just have to do 3 things. You can't bring people you're enslaving. You have to become Catholic, and you have to become Mexican. And all these people came in from the South, and they're like, yeah, we'll take the land. But guess what they didn't do? They didn't become Mexican. They didn't become Catholic, and they brought the people they were enslaving with them. And then they're like, okay, this is our country now, right? And they break off. So Mexico couldn't get people up here. And then when California becomes part of the US, there's a short little bump with the gold rush, where a whole bunch of people come into San Francisco and the Bay Area. But then after that, after the gold rush peters out, again, nobody wanted to come here. It's too far away. In between California and the rest of the US, again, there's desert and huge mountains and a whole lot of space, and then people. So there was these different moves to try to get people out here. One was to kind of turn it into like this health tourist destination. And there's a whole bunch of sanitariums and stuff, and like dry out your tuberculosis kind of places here in California. And then this woman who had never been to California writes a book called Ramona, where she just creates this whole fantasy of what the missions were like. And again, she'd never been here. And by that time, the missions were secular. People had literally dismantled the missions and used the material to build their houses. So she writes this whole fantasy book where you've got like Spanish senoritas and Indian princesses and all these, and that's what they're called in the book, and all of these different, like just fantastical, romantic telenovela kind of book that all these people read. It became this hit, and people are like, I want to go to California and take part in this whole Spanish culture that didn't exist here. So people start coming out here as tourists, and they're like, go to the missions, and the missions don't even have roofs, like they've been taken apart, and there's no Spanish colonial, there's no senoritas, there's no indigenous people, it's all gone. And so that's when California starts rebuilding the missions, and starts with this whole like mission schlocky architecture of the freaking Spanish style roofs everywhere, Spanish style, Spanish tile, and creates this whole image of what we thought Spanish colonialism was, but it never was. And that's what Fiesta is based on. Fiesta, again, is this tourist draw that comes after the whole like Spanish romanticizing of California in order to get tourists out here. So I don't know why we celebrate Fiesta. It erases indigenous people. It glorifies a history that, well, it doesn't even like glorify the correct history. And the actual history is one that annihilated the indigenous population. So I don't get it. And I don't get why the college that, we might work for has a land acknowledgement statement, an official one on their website, but also had the celebration of the colonization of the land that they acknowledge belongs to the Chumash, but also let's celebrate the colonization by having a whole bunch of rides celebrating Fiesta on college land, which also belongs to the Chumash, right? I don't understand it.
Mhm.
So I don't know. To me, I don't get it. I really don't. Um,
It sounds like you're overthinking it, Geordie. At least that's what everyone tells me when I try to like explain to them why something's wrong, ethically. You're overthinking it, Josh. Chill out, relax. It's not that bad.
well, that's what people say when they don't understand something like that movie. Uh, what was that movie with that David Lynch movie with Naomi Watts? Sort of street in LA. Anyway,
I
it
don't
didn't
know.
make any sense. Movie didn't make any sense. And I walked out of that movie and the person I was with was like, well, don't think about it too much. And I was like,
Was it blue? Was blue in the title? No.
no, it was the name of a road.
Oh,
Longest street in LA.
there are people watching right now screaming at us, being like, it's that road. Yes, I know the road you're talking about. It's like an iconic LA road. And like,
Yeah.
if we had a researcher and a staff, if I were Joe Rogan, I'd be like, look up the name of that road, and tell us what it is. Right? Get back to me. Um,
But
so
yeah,
what?
people
Uh,
people don't get stuff. It turns into, don't think about it too much. And I think that's what's happening with Fiesta because people don't want to criticize it because they feel like they're criticizing uh a marginalized population and without looking and seeing that it's colonization. It is the colonization of California that we're celebrating. While we claim to, okay, and fine, if you want to celebrate that, then fine. But don't also acknowledge that this land is Chumash land in the next sentence, because that's what doesn't, right? So if you want to
yeah.
celebrate the colonization of California, then celebrate the colonization of California. But don't then include indigenous people in your acknowledgement of people who have a right to space and life and stuff like that, because that's that you're celebrating the colonization and the genocide of those people.
Well, you're not allowed to point out hypocrisy either. That's another bad thing. It's not Mulholland Drive, is it? That's a
Yes,
different movie.
that's it. It's Mulholland Drive.
Okay, there we got it. I don't even need research staff. I can do it myself. Um,
Well, and
but so what I go ahead.
for the one person who might note that Mulholland Drive is not the longest road in LA, that's right. It's Sepulveda Boulevard is the longest road in LA. But anyway, go ahead.
Good. So yeah, just last thing on this is that people say, well, it's taken on a new meaning. So now we have all cultures coming together to participate in dancing and food and recreation and this unity and all of that. And so therefore what it once was, it's really something out. And if you took it away, children would lose their dreams of dancing and being spirit, and businesses would lose money, and small business vendors would lose money, and there would be a huge loss to the economy when people really depended on this. Like the eggs I'm buying are 3 for $1, 4 for $1. Some of them are much more expensive, but this matters to them. And so that's what I get back is like, well, yeah, but this is like a event that, that has that name, but it's really about this other thing. Does that hold water to you? Or what do you say to people who are like, you're just going to hurt the poor people among us who rely on this event to make money?
Well, like I said, it's okay, have it, but
Yeah.
stop pretending that it reflects the culture of California at any point, because again, it doesn't. It was this made up sort of tourist story, this narrative that brought tourists in. And stop then, like, if you have a land acknowledgement in your email signature and you're like, but we can't take this away. I mean, come to terms with what that means, because those things are opposed to each other. It's hypocritical. So it's fine if we want to have this week-long tourist, spend a whole lot of money, small businesses make money, people get to dance, like that's fine, but like, call it what it is. It's a week-long people get drunk and dance festival. Like that's what it is. And you want to, it doesn't make sense to me. And it's fine to celebrate, and I'm not saying like you can't celebrate Mexican heritage, because that is a lot of this is, well, it's called Old Spanish Days. Mexican heritage is a big part of that. And I don't want to not celebrate Mexican heritage. Mexican heritage is a huge part of Santa Barbara and of California. So, but we need to we need to come to terms with what we're celebrating and like kind of call it what it is and figure out what it is, because we don't seem to know what it is, which is why I think a lot of people are like, don't overthink it, because we haven't thought it through. We haven't thought through what it actually means to all of us.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things too, where if there were actual leader who came out and like said, we need to stop this, and explained and educated that we live in such a groupthink society, that other people would be like, oh, you're right, I never thought about that. When clearly you and I can have this conversation and we think about that. They all can think about it before they participate in these events, but it's, people are safe if no one's complaining. But if people complaining, then they all of a sudden have to like act like, oh yeah, I'm outraged too. And very, very frustrating. Did you ever go to a Fiesta parade when you were growing up? It's so hot and like humid.
Yeah, all I remember about Fiesta when I was little is it was very hot, and there was a lot of horses and heat for some reason just feel like somehow horses add to heat, like and also a lot of clothing. Like that's something I've always looked at Fiesta, and like people were wearing all these clothes, like these huge dresses and like the outfits, and I'm just like, aren't you hot? You're up there on that horse, you gotta be I'm schwitzing down here, like, so those are my memories of Fiesta, is hot, and why are you wearing all those clothes? Aren't you hot? And like the amount of makeup that people wear, how do they not sweat through it? I would be sweating through that. It would just slide right off.
Yeah.
So those are my memories of Fiesta.
And I'm not a horse person. I get really nervous around horses.
Well, they kick
and kill me. It's like those spiders.
And they kick you. That's how Don Draper's dad died in Mad Men.
Was that a TV show? Pop culture? Yeah. Sorry. You know me. Golden Girls, Seinfeld, What's Happening. That's about it. No. Alice. We need to talk about Alice one day. That show.
Yeah, I love that show. And then the spinoff from that.
Was that Flo show?
Yeah. What was it called though?
Flo? No.
Was it? I don't know.
I don't think I've ever seen one of those. We should do is a show on bad spinoffs. We should do The Ropers and Flo, or whatever it was called, The Golden Palace.
I like The Golden Palace.
I love the Golden. I mean, it didn't have Dorothy on it, but it still was funny.
It had Don Cheadle in it, and Cheech.
Yes, I love Cheech Marin.
Yeah, and Don Cheadle is so good. He's just such a good actor that, like, even on a small television show like that, he's just like golden.
Mm-hmm.
Not to make a pun, but all right.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of shows. But anyway, I appreciate your views on Fiesta, because I don't really understand it. But like people who I know, like smart people, like who I respect, are all in on it. And it's just like, I realize part of it is image. You kind of have to do what everyone else is doing. And if you don't do it, you're seen as like the weirdo. But come on, like, take a stand and do something, or call it out. Or like you're saying, don't be a hypocrite about it. Just be honest about what you're doing.
Well, and just think about all the different ways in the US. The US is a giant country. Think about all the different ways we could be celebrating old colonial days, in the South, on the East Coast, in Hawaii, in Alaska. Like, would you feel the same way if you saw celebrations of, parts of colonial culture in the southern part of the US, or in the East, or in Hawaii? I don't know if you would. So how would that be viewed by the rest of the country if we celebrated old colonial Mississippi days?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guarantee you, not good. Okay. So Geordie, I think we're about out of time, and I don't know if we missed anything we wanted to talk about, but I think this has been a good one. And when are you gonna see Barbie again? You gonna see it in the theater, or are you gonna stream it?
I don't know. I may be in the theater again. I'd like to see it again, but yeah, I'll see it again soon. Definitely.
All right. Well, once again, great conversation. Appreciate your time, and we'll do it again.
All right.
Take care.